They never planned for you. That's the part that still unsettles them. You were supposed to fit neatly into a role, something recognizable, something they could explain away with a single word: kind, cold, loyal, dangerous, predictable. But you never stayed where they placed you. Every time they thought they had you figured out, you shifted just enough to break the picture they were building. And now, they don't know what to do with you. They've been observing for a long time, quietly at first, watching how you move, how you speak, how you respond, trying to chart your behavior like a pattern that could be memorized. But nothing sticks. One moment, you're the most compassionate presence in the room, bending down to help someone no one else even noticed, eyes full of sincerity. The next, you remove someone from your life with surgical precision. No drama, no tears, no second chances, just absence. And that contrast rattles them. People need consistency to feel safe. They need to know what version of you they're dealing with so they can adjust, prepare, manipulate if possible. Are you gentle or ruthless? Forgiving or unforgiving? Warm or distant? But you refuse to answer that question for them. You don't live in extremes the way they expect. You live in truth, and truth changes depending on what's standing in front of you. You give deeply, but selectively. You care intensely, but intelligently. You'll pour time, energy, and patience into someone who's genuine, even if they have nothing to offer you in return. But the moment you sense entitlement, deception, or disrespect, something switches, not out of anger, out of clarity. You don't argue, you don't explain, you don't try to be understood, you simply withdraw. And to people who rely on access to feel powerful, that feels like cruelty. They call it cold, they call it heartless, they whisper that something is wrong with you. But what they don't see is that this isn't randomness, it's discernment. You aren't inconsistent, you're responsive. You meet people where they are, not where they pretend to be. And that makes you impossible to categorize. There was a time you were easier to read, softer around the edges, more predictable. You gave everyone the benefit of the doubt because you believed that was what being good meant. You stayed too long. You forgave too often. You ignored your instincts because you didn't want to be seen as harsh or unfair, and it cost you. Slowly at first, then all at once. Being open made you vulnerable to people who saw kindness as an invitation. Being loyal made you easy to take for granted. Being understanding turned you into someone others felt entitled to drain. And somewhere along the way, something in you learned. Not in a dramatic moment, not with a declaration, but quietly. You realized that survival doesn't belong to the pure-hearted alone. It belongs to those who can adapt. So you evolved. You didn't lose your empathy. You refined it. You didn't harden your heart. You protected it. You learned that compassion without boundaries is self-destruction, and boundaries without compassion or emptiness. You chose neither extreme. You chose balance. Now you decide who gets your softness and who gets your silence. You decide who earns your presence and who only ever knew a version of you that no longer exists. This control over your emotional access is what unsettles them the most. They want rules they can exploit. They want formulas. If you help one person, you should help everyone. If you cut one person off, you must be cruel. But you don't operate on childish logic anymore. You understand that fairness isn't sameness. You understand that energy matters, intent matters, history matters. Someone in genuine pain might receive your last bit of strength. Someone who's hurt you repeatedly might not even receive a reply, and you don't feel guilty about that anymore. Because guilt was a tool others used to keep you available. This isn't duality for the sake of drama. This is wisdom earned the hard way. You tried being endlessly gentle. It nearly erased you. You tried being endlessly guarded. It nearly hollowed you out. So you became something more precise. Someone who can love fully and leave cleanly. Someone who can forgive without reopening doors. Someone who can be present without being consumed. And what truly disturbs them is not that you have different sides. It's that you've made peace with all of them. You're no longer fighting yourself. You don't stay up questioning whether you're good enough, kind enough, pure enough. You know who you are, and you no longer need their agreement to validate it. That self-acceptance changes everything. When shame no longer works, control disappears. When guilt no longer sticks, manipulation fails. When you stop explaining your boundaries, people either respect them or remove themselves. And both outcomes are fine with you. They still try to decode you. They trade stories. They compare experiences. One says you saved them when no one else would. Another says you vanished without warning. Both are telling the truth. They just encountered different sides of the same whole person. And that contradiction drives them mad. Because you are not a role, you are a response. And the version of you someone meets is determined less by who you are and more by who they are when they come to you. They keep circling the same question, even if they never say it out loud. Which one is real? The gentle one who shows up at the worst moments, who listens without interrupting, who gives without keeping score, or the detached one who can disappear overnight, who feels nothing when respect is crossed, who closes doors so cleanly it feels like you were never there at all. They want one answer, because one answer would make you manageable. But the truth is, both are real, and neither exists without the other. What they don't understand is that you aren't switching masks, you're responding to reality. You're reacting to what's actually in front of you, not to the fantasy version of people you used to believe in. Your warmth is earned. Your distance is triggered. And once you learn the difference, there was no going back. You didn't wake up one day deciding to be this way. This wasn't a personality choice. It was adaptation. It was what happened after being burned for giving too much. After watching your generosity become a resource others felt entitled to mine. It was what happened after realizing that being endlessly available doesn't make you noble, it makes you easy. And being endlessly hard doesn't make you strong, it makes you isolated. So you learned how to move between the two with intention. You began to notice patterns. Who only reached out when they needed something. Who disappeared when you needed support. Who apologized beautifully, but never changed. Who spoke about loyalty while practicing convenience. You stopped arguing with those patterns. You stopped trying to explain them away. Instead, you adjusted, quietly, precisely. That's when people started getting uncomfortable. They were used to you being consistent in a way they could predict. Used to your patience outlasting their behavior. Used to your empathy smoothing over their mistakes. And now, suddenly, there were consequences. Not loud ones, not dramatic ones. Just distance, silence. A closed door that didn't reopen. They call it ruthless because they don't benefit from it. They call it cold because they no longer have access. But what they're really reacting to is loss of control. You no longer bend yourself to keep others comfortable. You no longer dilute your instincts to maintain harmony. You choose alignment over approval. And that choice is deeply unsettling to people who rely on your flexibility to avoid accountability. You still feel everything. If anything, you feel more deeply now. But you no longer broadcast it. You don't leak your emotions into rooms that haven't earned them. You don't give explanations to people who have already decided their version of you. You've learned that transparency without discernment is just another way to be exposed. So you practice selective presence. Some people get your full attention, your patience, your loyalty. They experience you as deeply human, almost impossibly caring. Others get your indifference, your distance, your refusal to engage. They experience you as unmovable, even intimidating. And neither experience is accidental. This is where they get it wrong. They think you're being inconsistent. They think you're playing games. They think you're unstable. But instability is reacting emotionally to every stimulus. What you've developed is the opposite. It's control. It's knowing when to lean in and when to step back. It's knowing that not every situation deserves your heart, and not every conflict deserves your energy. You stopped treating access to you as a right. You started treating it as a privilege. And once you do that, everything shifts. Conversations change. Dynamics change. People reveal themselves faster. The ones who valued you for who you are adjust. The ones who valued you for what they could take get angry. They test you now. They push boundaries to see which version shows up. They drop subtle guilt. They tell sad stories. They hint at history. They try to trigger the part of you that used to rescue, to fix, to overextend. But that version of you is no longer unprotected. You see the manipulation before it finishes forming, and instead of reacting, you choose. That choice is what makes you unreadable. Not because you're hiding, but because you're no longer predictable. You don't follow the same script for everyone. You don't reward bad behavior with access. You don't punish good behavior with suspicion. You meet people exactly where they are, and that mirror is sharper than they expect. Some walk away calling you heartless. Some stay, realizing you're one of the few people who loves without illusion, and you're okay with both outcomes. Because you're no longer trying to be understood by everyone. You're only interested in being real. You've accepted something most people never do. That you can be compassionate without being weak. That you can be distant without being cruel. That you can walk away without hating. That you can care deeply and still protect yourself. This integration is what makes you whole. They're still trying to decide if you're safe or dangerous. They don't realize you're neither by default. You're responsive. And the version of you they meet will always be a reflection of how they show up. What unsettles them most is not your boundaries, not even your silence. It's the fact that you are comfortable with all of yourself. You no longer split your nature into acceptable and unacceptable parts. You don't apologize for your edge, and you don't downplay your compassion. You stopped negotiating with your own instincts just to seem consistent. And that internal peace, they can feel it. It makes them nervous. They grew up believing people must be one thing, soft or strong, kind or cruel, loyal or selfish. But you exist outside that binary. You learned that life doesn't ask for purity. It asks for precision, and precision requires range. So you developed it, not to intimidate, not to dominate, but to survive with your integrity intact. You understand now that empathy without limits becomes self-betrayal, and strength without warmth becomes isolation. You've lived both extremes. You know their cost, so you built something more intelligent in between. A system, a filter, a way of moving through the world that honors truth over performance. They mistake your calm for emptiness. They don't see the discipline behind it. They don't see the years it took to learn how to pause instead of react, to listen instead of defend, to walk away instead of explode. They only see the result, someone they can't provoke, can't guilt, can't pull back into old dynamics. That's why the stories about you are so contradictory. One person calls you an angel, another calls you heartless. One swears you saved them. Another insists you destroyed them, and neither story is wrong. Each one is simply incomplete. Each one is filtered to how they treated you, what they asked of you, what they tried to take. You stopped trying to correct those stories. You realized something liberating. Your character doesn't need consensus. People will always describe you from the position they met you in. The healed will remember your softness. The manipulative will remember your refusal. The dishonest will remember your distance, and all of it can coexist without you carrying the burden of explanation. This is where your real power lives, not in being feared, not in being unhooked. You don't chase validation anymore. You don't fear misunderstanding. You don't rush to clarify your intentions to people committed to misreading you. You let outcomes speak. You've also learned to trust your internal signals, the subtle ones, the shifts in tone, the pauses that don't match the words, the warmth that feels transactional, the concern that arrives with conditions. You don't confront these things immediately. You observe, you let patterns repeat, and when they do, you act decisively. That decisiveness is what people interpret as cold, But coldness is indifference without reason. What you practice is discernment. You don't cut people off impulsively. You don't disappear at the first discomfort. You leave when clarity arrives, when the pattern is undeniable, when staying would require you to abandon yourself. They wish you were louder about it. They wish you'd argue, explain, give them something to push against. Silence frustrates them because it offers no leverage. You don't give speeches, you don't issue ultimatums, you simply withdraw access. And that absence forces them to sit with themselves. You've noticed how differently people approach you now, more carefully, more thoughtfully. There's a pause before they speak, a measuring of words. They're trying to figure out what version of you they'll get, and what they don't realize is that the answer is simple. They'll get the version they invite. Those who arrive honestly are met with depth. Those who arrive with agendas are met with distance. Those who test boundaries meet them. Those who respect them move closer. It's not punishment, it's alignment. You're no longer interested in being everything to everyone. You're interested in being accurate, in responding to reality as it is, not as you wish it were. That shift alone has changed your life more than any confrontation ever could. And yes, it drives them mad, because you can't be managed by labels anymore. You don't fit the narrative they prepared for you. You aren't predictable in the ways that make people comfortable. You're grounded, integrated, awake. They keep waiting for you to pick a side, to be only gentle or only ruthless, to settle into a role they can understand. But you won't, because you know the truth now. Wholeness isn't about choosing between light and dark. It's about having access to both and the wisdom to know when to use each. That's not instability. That's evolution. And here's the part they never say out loud, not even to themselves. Your presence forces a comparison they didn't agree to make. When you stopped performing, it quietly highlighted how much of their lives are still performance. When you chose restraint, it exposed how reactive they've become. When you chose alignment, it reflected the compromises they've normalized just to stay comfortable. That's why some of them suddenly rewrite history. They'll say you changed, that you became distant, that you're not who you used to be. What they really mean is, you no longer make it easy for them to remain the same. You no longer absorb emotional labor that isn't yours. You no longer translate disrespect into patience. You no longer confuse endurance with loyalty. You didn't harden, you clarified. There's a quiet confidence that comes with that clarity, not the kind that needs to announce itself or dominate space, the kind that knows when to speak and when to let silence do the work. You've learned that not every misunderstanding deserves correction. Some are invitations to step away. Some are warnings disguised as confusion. They test you differently now. Subtle pushes instead of open challenges. Backhanded compliments. Half questions meant to gauge your reaction. They're looking for the old entry points, the guilt hooks, the obligation triggers. But those doors don't open anymore. Not because you locked them in anger, but because you finally recognized they were never meant to stay open. What replaced them is discernment, clean, unemotional, unnegotiable. You don't rush decisions anymore. You don't chase urgency that isn't yours. You let time reveal intent, and time is honest. It shows who respects your pace and who only valued your availability. It shows who adapts and who resents the fact that they now have to meet you where you are. Some people fade quietly, no confrontation, no drama, just a gradual absence. And you let them go without chasing closure, because you've learned that closure isn't something you extract from others. It's something you grant yourself when understanding arrives. Others remain, but the dynamic shifts. They speak more carefully. They listen more closely, not out of fear, but awareness. They realize you see patterns now, not excuses. They realize access to you requires intention. And the most unsettling part for them, you're not angry about any of it. There's no bitterness in your distance, no revenge in your boundaries. Just calm accuracy. Just choice. That's what makes you impossible to manipulate now. You don't need to win. You don't need to be right. You don't need them to understand. You need coherence between who you are and how you live. Everything else is optional. So when they say you're hard to read, what they really mean is you're no longer broadcasting your inner world for public consumption. When they say you're intimidating, what they mean is you're no longer easy to influence. When they say you've changed, what they mean is you've stopped abandoning yourself. And you know what? You're fine with that. Because you didn't disappear. You didn't become cold. You didn't lose your humanity. You refined it. You learned when to offer warmth and when to preserve it. You learned that access is sacred, that presence is currency, that peace is worth protecting, even if it costs familiarity. They're still watching. They probably always will. But now, the watching has no grip on you. It doesn't steer your choices. It doesn't shape your posture. It doesn't rush your becoming. You move forward anyway. Quietly, precisely, fully aware, not because you're trying to prove anything, but because this is who you are when you finally stop pretending.